We did one of the 3 Ds earlier, which was defense. The 2 other Ds are diplomacy and deterrence. And the overarching theme of this session is diplomacy and deterrence. We're delighted to have the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Bahrain, our good friend Dr. Abdullatif bin Rashid al-Zayani, who will be speaking, as well as Ayman Safadi, a regular leader of the Jordanian delegation here to the Manama Dialogue, Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and Expatriates of the Kingdom of Jordan, and Dr. Fuad Hussein, Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Iraq. We heard earlier from the U.S. Secretary of Defense a strong, reassuring message about the role that the United States intends to continue to play in the Gulf. And what we look forward to in this session is 3 different Arab perspectives on how they too will contribute to diplomacy and deterrence to ensure stability in the region. So with that, could I perhaps ask first Dr. Abdullatif bin Rashid al-Zayani, the Foreign Minister of the Kingdom of Bahrain, and our host to make his remarks. Thank you very much.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
In the name of God.
Chipman, Your Highnesses, Excellencies, distinguished participants, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. May I, at the outset, welcome you all to Bahrain and say how much I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this 3rd plenary session of the 2021 IISS Manama Dialogue. I want to thank the IISS and Dr. John Chipman for the invitation to discuss the concepts of diplomacy and deterrence, issues of particular relevance to the Gulf and Middle East, as well as to wider questions of international peace and security. In international relations, deterrence can be defined as seeking to influence the behavior of an actor, to deter a particular course of action with the prospect of sanctions or other negative consequences. Traditionally, we tend to view deterrence in a slightly old-fashioned Cold War manner, as a state or group of states seeking to affect the behavior of another state via the explicit or implied threat of force or sanctions. And in addition to what the SecDef, Secretary Austin, in his remarks this morning, introduced his term of integrated deterrence, I also believe that today we need to take a more comprehensive view, one which includes deterrence in all its forms, and which can let us see more clearly how it can be tied to a broad definition of modern diplomacy. First, let us be clear that deterrence no longer applies to the behavior only of nation states. Today, we face challenges from a host of both state and non-state actors, including terrorist organizations, militias, proxy groups, and many others. What might be effective as deterrence against a nation state may not be relevant in the case of a non-state actors. But we also need to move beyond seeing deterrence through the lens of military action and/or sanctions, what you might call hard power deterrence. Today, in the post-COVID era, we need to look at deterrence as a broader range of potential outcomes that can be leveraged to influence the behavior of potential adversaries. So hard power deterrence can be complemented by, for example, electronic and cyber deterrence, economic deterrence, and social deterrence. What do I mean by that? I mean making the deterrent force be both external and internal. Letting pressure from within has an effect on an adversary's behavior. Let the adversary's population and supporters see the consequences of the problematic behavior, both in terms of direct negative results like sanctions, travel restrictions, and the like, but also in terms of missed positive opportunities. So as an adversary finds itself excluded from networks of peace, prosperity, commerce, and cooperation until such time as it modifies its behavior, and as it sees others move ahead to a more positive future. So it will come under pressure from within to change its ways. Of course, such deterrence, which we might term passive deterrence, will not be effective for all adversaries. But I believe it should be kept in mind as another string to our bow. And in today's post-COVID era, nations want resilience, while their peoples seek hope, safety, and positivity. Thanks to advances in data analysis and tools like social media sentiment analysis, we have a near real-time ability not only to measure and track the sentiment of our own people towards national development policies, but also how our adversary, its people, and supporters are responding to soft power deterrence efforts, to see if, how, and where these efforts are working, and to assess whether that adversary's public statements truly represent the views of its stakeholders and constituents. Distinguished participants, in all these fields and more, diplomacy has a key role to play in effective deterrence. Diplomacy is essential in ensuring that our approach, whether hard power or soft power, meets the 4 C's of effective deterrence, namely credibility. Using diplomacy to communicate to the other party the resolve that they will suffer consequences should they take the actions we are seeking to prevent. Calibration, ensuring that diplomacy is a tool to gather and analyze information on what level of consequences are proportionate and effective to influence the behavior we seek to address. Coordination through diplomacy, building and sustaining alliances of like-minded states to create a stronger deterrence, including passive deterrence. Consistency, communicating clearly and with one voice over a sustained period that behavior we are seeking to address what behavior we are seeking to address and what the consequences will be for failing to do so. In all these areas, diplomacy is a vital tool of effective, both active and passive deterrence. It is private diplomacy which coordinates like-minded states to develop and enforce effective deterrence frameworks. Public diplomacy, which communicates deterrence clearly, consistently, and credibly to the other party. And digital diplomacy, which reaches out directly to the other party's supporters and people and assesses their response to our efforts. Highnesses, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in summary, I'm proposing that in the post-COVID era, we should be creative in using diplomacy and data analysis in our approach towards and implementation of deterrence. In doing so, we can work towards a win-win outcome for the Middle East, namely, a region that is safe, secure, and prosperous for all its peoples, an integrated region resting on the two pillars of coexistence and interdependence. I hope these brief remarks have provided some ideas for discussions, and I very much look forward to exchanging views with so many distinguished and experienced policy experts. Thank you.
Abdullatif, thank you very much for providing an impeccable conceptual overview for our discussions in this session and for transmitting the message that diplomacy and deterrence requires strategic clarity and that deterrence without strategic clarity creates uncertain ambiguity. And for your call for clarity, I think is very much appreciated. With that, could I ask Ayman Safadi to address this plenary? Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Excellencies, dear friends, good morning to you all. And once again, our gratitude for our brethren in the Kingdom of Bahrain for the tremendous hospitality and for this really timely meeting. And of course, a big shout out to you, John, and your colleagues at the IISS for continuing to provide us with a forum for such a rich, deep, insightful dialogue. I don't want to engage in an intellectual sort of analysis of deterrence versus diplomacy. I think there are better people who are more equipped to do that than we politicians who are having to deal with real issues in real time. So I just want to say that our region, we need more than deterrence, we need solutions. Crises have been going on for far too long, causing far too much destruction, too much pain, and too many missed opportunities. Key to that is identifying the sources of threats to our region, to its prosperity. My dear friend Abdullatif spoke of a region that is safe, secure, and prosperous. And that is a goal on which we all agree. The question is, how do we get to that safe and secure and prosperous future? And we do that by, first of all, again, identifying what are the sources of threats that we're dealing with, agreeing on final answers to them, and then employ active and proactive diplomacy to try and get to those solutions. What has been not really there is a proactive diplomacy from the region itself. I think in this part of the world we need to take more ownership of our issues and we need to be more active, more involved in trying to find those solutions. That does not mean we do not work with our friends and partners. Absolutely. We do need to work and coordinate with our friends and partners globally, because a lot of the issues with which we are grappling in this region do have implications that resonate way beyond the borders of our neighborhood. But ultimately, we need to be more active and more involved. And to get a safe, prosperous, and secure future, we need to focus on our peoples, on creating horizons, on creating opportunities. And to do that, we need to dry up sources of conflict and deal with the environments of despair and lawlessness and injustice that we see so rampant in so many places of our region. We need to accept that there are threats that are inherent in conflicts that are ongoing, starting from the root cause of conflict, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and the absence of a practical, just solution to it, going through the crisis in Syria, in Yemen, in Libya, supporting Iraq in consolidating the great victory they achieved against Daesh, and then moving on. But other sources of threat have to do with creating opportunity for our people, our youth, our young people. To me, a major source of threat is 3 million Syrian kids of school-going age who are not going to school. More than 12 million Arab kids who are denied their right to education. Millions of refugees scattered all over the region and abroad with no hope and no future. This is the real source of threat, and this is where we need active diplomacy to try and see how we can all pool our resources and move together to create answers to those questions. And unfortunately, we all speak of conflict fatigue, donor fatigue, and it is happening. And we see that very clearly in the case of refugees, where we see less and less attention being paid to them, and somehow forgetting the fact that if we abandon those refugees to hate, to need, to bitterness, to despair, to ignorance, then we're really sowing the seeds of future conflict that are going to be worse for all of us. And that's why, again, I go back to proactive diplomacy, and let's identify areas where we need to move. We cannot jump over conflicts, we cannot jump over issues. On the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, we cannot accept the status quo, and we should not mistake the calm for acquiescence. That conflict remains a major source of conflict. The only way to solving it is the two-state solution, and that means that we need to work together towards bringing about that solution that would realize a sovereign, independent Palestinian state on June 4, 1967, lines with occupied Jerusalem as capital, living in peace and security with Israel per all international laws and all previous initiatives. This is not a slogan, this is not just a repetition of an old stand, this is reality, because the conflict is there and you have to solve it. And how could we have peace, and how could we deter against any threat if the GDP per capita per Palestinian is under $3,000 compared to GDP per capita of over $40,000 for Israelis? It just doesn't work. That is not a recipe for a future of peace and security and prosperity that we all want. Go to Syria. Again, a crisis ongoing for 11 years. We need a solution. We all know that the solution has to be a political solution. And we all know that the suffering of the Syrian people has gone way too far. Again, how do we deter the threat inherent in the continuation of that conflict? By working together actively with our partners to bring about a political solution that should start by bringing the conflict to being back once again to be about Syria and Syrian people, and not about international and regional agendas competing. How do we do that? We in the region have to do our bit. It is incomprehensible, inconceivable that everybody gets a seat on the table except for the Arab region collectively. And that's why we in Jordan say we must get together, work with our partners, work with our friends, and try and articulate and move with a solution to the crisis. Again, I can go on about Libya, about Yemen, about all those issues, but ultimately this region needs to come together in a proactive diplomatic manner and see what we can do here to articulate solutions to our problems, and then rally regional and international support for it, and we move forward. COVID, dear friends, have exposed how fragile our regional cooperation mechanisms are when it came to health infrastructure, pharmaceuticals, food security, water security. COVID has shown not only that we cannot do it alone, but it has shown that there's a lot to be done in order for us to create the infrastructure necessary for us to be able to address the challenges that we all face. And that's where you need active diplomacy. We go to the Arab League meetings as colleagues here, and I think more and more of us are saying it's about time that we started really building through a mechanism of regional cooperation that does not just focus on talking the talk politically, but also does focus on doing what it takes to create that infrastructure of regional cooperation. So we do need proactive diplomacy. Instead of thinking about deterrence, we really need to think about solutions. And while it is acceptable to employ deterrence as a tool for a short period of time, it cannot be a replacement to long-term thinking of how to solve problems and create regional relations on the basis of respect and on basis that would allow for all of us to come together and work together. Take the issue of Iranian-Arab relations, for instance. And again, I think I can comfortably speak for all my Arab colleagues when I say none of us wants a conflict with Iran. We all want to be able to get on, and we don't want another crisis in the region. But for that to happen, we need to identify why is it that we have tension. And it is because of policies that are interventionist in our affairs. And once that stops, and once we're able to rebuild relations on the basis of non-interference and respect for neighborly relations, we should be able to move together and work together and pool all those tremendous resources that we all bring to the table and move forward with that. So I think, again, we need to be, diplomacy is the key word, but it is active diplomacy. It's not reactive diplomacy, it's proactive diplomacy, and it has to be a diplomacy that is based, anchored in a clear understanding of what the challenges are and facing them head on, and accept that when things don't work, they don't work. And when we need to find alternative solutions, we need to find alternative solutions. We cannot be stuck in ideological kind of dogmatic positions and not move forward. This is the dynamic nature and the fluid nature of conflicts and the challenges that we have. And again, if we talk about other sources of threat, we talk about terrorism, which is a growing threat. As His Majesty King Abdullah keeps saying, terrorism has been defeated but not destroyed. This is not a threat that you want to deter. This is a threat that you want to sort of eliminate completely. And in order for us to be able to eliminate that threat completely, we need again to see what is it that we need to do. It is not enough to focus on the military component of it, nor is it enough to focus on the security component of it. What we need to do is to look at the ideology and stand up to it. And this is something that only we in the region would be able to do, of course, with the support of our partners. We need to come up with the message and say that those people do not represent the faith and do not represent our values and culture. But we need to do that. But also, most importantly, we need again to create horizons. We need to make sure that we solve chaos and despair and other injustices on which radical thinking in all its manifestations and form thrive. And that, again, needs a proactive diplomacy, and that needs a pooling of resources. In Jordan, reality is we've been at the receiving end of every crisis in this part of the world. And we continue to deal with that, but we continue to deal with that in employing a proactive diplomacy, again, that tries to engage, that tries to face things head on, and that promotes dialogue and conversation and engagement as means to addressing those conflicts. We're going to continue to do what we've always done, work for peace, work for stability, work for security, and also work for building infrastructure of regional cooperation. One example is the trilateral mechanism that we have with our dear brothers in Iraq. That's a mechanism that is, I keep saying, it is for us, because quite often we get to ask, is this an alliance? Is this? No. We say, no, it's just three countries coming together to do what's best for our countries and for our peoples by building on the natural complementarities that exist. And it is a block in a building that we hope will grow, bringing in all our brothers and all our partners who do see an opportunity in that and who do want to work with us on expanding areas of agreement and areas of cooperation. And this is a region that, again, has had more than its share of challenges. And I think part of the approach must be is how do we manage disagreement as we work for expanding areas of agreement. And I think there's a lot that we can do together. And again, if we do start with things that matter, if we do start with trying and create better conditions for our people, better opportunities for our people, I think that will create a momentum that would ultimately help us move forward and address the political issues. So again, I just want to sum up by saying deterrence could inherently mean dealing with a problem on a short-term basis. And that is not going to cut it for our region, which has been plagued with crises that have gone on for far too long. What we need to do is to move from deterrence into identifying solutions and employ inclusive, proactive diplomacy and address that solution, address those problems and find solutions and get to that safe, prosperous, secure region that my dear friend spoke of. Thank you.
Ayman, thank you very much for that appeal to practical diplomacy. I've already got a couple of questions in my own head about specific diplomacy you have with some of your neighboring countries, and I hope to get to that in the question and answer period. But before we do that, we're really delighted to have the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Iraq, Dr. Fuad Hussein, who will address us now in Arabic. So for those of you who don't feel fully fluent in Arabic, please address your headphones, and Dr. Fuad Hussein will speak to us on diplomacy and deterrence from the position of Iraq.
Dr. Chipman.
Dr. Chipman,
Thank you very much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
in the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful,
Abdullatif,
Your Excellency, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Abdullatif bin Rashid al-Zayani, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Bahrain, Your Highnesses, Your Excellencies, the Ministers of Foreign Affairs and Defense, Excellencies, the representatives of the participating countries, peace, mercy, and blessing of God be upon you. It is a pleasure for me to participate for the second time in the 17th edition of the Regional Security Summit, the Manama Dialogue, that is being organized by the International Institute for Strategic Studies as the representative of the government of Iraq. Please allow me at the outset to express my sincere thanks and appreciation to the government of the Kingdom of Bahrain, led by His Majesty King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa, the Crown Prince, Prime Minister Prince Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa, and the dear people of the kingdom for sponsoring on an annual basis this important international gathering. This gathering is indeed a great opportunity in which the heads and delegations from participating countries review their countries' visions and perceptions about the situations at the regional and international levels. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, today the world, especially the Middle East, is going through great challenges. They are facing difficult and complex conditions that require all of us to unite efforts and to join hands in order to confront them. The epidemiological crisis represented by COVID-19 has burdened many countries and peoples and has had major health, economic, political, and security repercussions. This requires serious and real cooperation among the countries of the world to face this dangerous pandemic. Such a cooperation has resulted in discovering the vaccines. To complete this success, we need to have the ability to distribute on equal footing those vaccines to the various countries of the world. We need to prevent the emergence of new strains of the epidemic, which coincided with major problems already suffered by the international community, such as terrorism and its dangers. The global political scene has recently witnessed the emergence of extremist organizations, which can disseminate terrorism and transmit it to other regions of the world. The Middle East and North Africa may be the first region of the world to be affected by this dangerous impact. It will not stop here, without any doubt. This is why establishing bridges of trust and cooperation among the countries and giving priority to the language of dialogue are very important to create a safe and stable environment that guarantees a decent life for peoples in order to achieve a decent living as well as economic and social prosperity, which are a vital and essential requirement. Ladies and gentlemen, we recall with you the great efforts made by Iraq in fighting terrorism. These efforts wouldn't have been achieved without the societal awareness and without Iraqi national cohesion. It wouldn't have achieved without the great efforts made by our security forces of all kinds to confront terrorism with the support of brothers, friends, and international partners, mainly the countries that took part in the international coalition. Iraq strengthened its efforts in this regard by adopting a comprehensive national strategy to combat terrorism, on top of which the ISIS terrorist organization to prevent ISIS from penetrating into society or controlling cities as happened in previous years. Despite the great efforts to defeat terrorism, continuing cooperation at the intelligence and security levels between Iraq and countries of the world is a priority for the Iraqi government and for brotherly and friendly governments. Ladies and gentlemen, winning over terrorism allowed us to achieve important goals at the local, regional, and international levels. The Iraqi government, with its various institutions, worked towards rebuilding cities liberated from ISIS. Various conferences and activities were held at the local and international levels in order to highlight cooperation in the field of building and investing in Iraq. Therefore, we repeat our call to developed countries and to international companies to invest in Iraq. The strategy based on cooperation and partnership in the field of economy and investment indeed represents an important step towards strengthening relations between various countries of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, last month, parliamentary elections took place under international oversight in a way that enhances the democratic process in Iraq and impacts the unity of the Iraqi components. At the regional level, the Iraqi Ministry of Foreign Affairs, based on a stable foreign policy and diplomatic movement, established dialogue and cooperation among the countries of the region. Such an effort led to holding the Regional Baghdad Conference in August 2021 in order to promote cooperation. A big number of countries participated in this conference, and this led to stability in the region, to rejecting violence, to resolving differences, and to adopting dialogue as a way of cooperation and integration. It is probably important to point out in this context to the development of Iraq's relations with the Gulf Cooperation Council. This shows the mutual interests of both Iraq and the GCC countries to achieve common goals in various political, economic, and social fields. This will have a positive impact on the peoples of these countries, in addition to a successful tripartite cooperation between Iraq, Jordan, and Egypt, without forgetting agreements concluded between the leaders of the three countries to establish a cooperation mechanism. This has led to achieving tangible results that were reflected in the consolidation of efforts between the governments and peoples of those countries and the serious pursuit to open new horizons for integration and cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, based on the objective of this conference and its main title since the first edition, which is regional security, let me recall that regional cooperation must represent a fundamental objective. It should be considered as a fixed strategy for the countries of the region. It will undoubtedly bridge the gap and end tensions between some regional parties.
مستمر بما يملك من تصور
Iraq,
وسياسة
based on its vision and its foreign policy, based on bringing the viewpoints of regional parties closer, will move forward. Many important meetings have already taken place in Iraq through an intensive diplomatic movement that led to several meetings between representatives of the governments of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Islamic Republic of Iran on the sidelines of the Baghdad Conference for Cooperation and Partnership between leaders and officials from a number of countries participating in the conference. The Iraqi government emphasizes cooperation with all parties in the region to push forward efforts to establish stability in Syria and to allow it to return back to the Arab League. As for Iraq's relationships with neighboring countries, relations with the two neighbors, the state of Kuwait and the Republic of Turkey, come within this context. Iraq will not spare any effort to achieve cooperation and partnership between the countries and peoples of the region. Please allow me, in conclusion, to wish all success to this conference, to meet the challenges that we are encountering, and to build a better future for our peoples. Peace, mercy, and blessings of God be upon you.
Deputy Prime Minister, thank you very much for those remarks, including important comments on the relations you have with your immediate neighbors. And I think neighborhood diplomacy might be a little bit of a theme that will naturally emerge from the three statements that we've heard. Can I remind everybody, you do have to put your badge into the microphone and press the button. It'll turn green, but only I will be able to turn it on. I might just lodge a question with Ayman Safadi for him to think about while the other questions come in. You spoke about the challenge that Jordan has had in the last few years with the extraordinary influx of refugees from Syria, the difficulty that you've had managing that with the best will in the world, perhaps not with all the financial support that you might deserve to have for meeting that challenge. But there's now also an effort to engage with Damascus directly and indirectly. And perhaps you could give us, when it comes to the discussion period, a little bit more insight about Jordan's approach to dealing with the government in Damascus. But with that, let me turn to the audience that now has logged on many questions, and I'll turn first to Giselle Khouri from Lebanon.
Thank you, Mr. Chipman. My question is for Ayman Safadi and for Damascus engagement. You were maybe the pioneer to restore relations with the Syrian regime. My question is, did you coordinate with UAE and Bahrain? And what about your coordination with USA administration for this step? And are you waiting for some positive steps from Bashar al-Assad to continue this diplomatic relations? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from Italy, Benjamin Petrini.
Thank you, John. My question is for the Deputy Prime Minister of Jordan. You have clearly outlined the challenges of armed conflict and security and how these relate to the development challenges in the broader region. So I want to ask you, what are some of the concrete steps in terms of diplomacy and cooperation to address these development and humanitarian challenges? Thank you very much.
And from Egypt, Yomna Al-Bakli.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your valuable remarks. My name is Yomna Al-Bakli from the Cairo International Center for Conflict Resolution, Peacekeeping and Peace Building. So we just had discussions yesterday in our youth dialogue about Syria and Yemen and conflicts in the region, basically discussing how Arab countries will eventually have to deal with these conflicts rather than shifting away from them, given their complexity. And there was an interesting perspective and ideas from different experts on how conflicts in Syria and others are now international frozen conflicts, And at this point, we'll have to think about conflict management rather than conflict resolution. So it would be great if we can hear your perspectives and thoughts on that. Thank you very much.
And last in this round, Ragida Dergam.
Yes, I want to ask Minister Zayani regarding the Gulf states' policies on Lebanon. In effect, basically you're just dropping the ball on a country that is being dismantled and being taken away from the Arab embrace, if you will. How is that policy? Is there not a need for a clearer and more constructive, proactive policy regarding a country that is really in front of everybody's eyes, getting kidnapped, if you will? And the same thing to the Deputy Prime Minister of Jordan. Again, you spoke of the proactive diplomacy. I see your proactive diplomacy in reference to Giselle's good question. I see it clear in Syria, almost the rehabilitation of Syria and the rehabilitation of President Bashar al-Assad. But I don't see your proactive diplomacy in saving a country like Lebanon from falling totally into the abyss. Where is your policy on that, other than that initiative to pass the gas and electricity from Egypt through Jordan? This is fine it's really for the benefit of Assad much more than it is for the benefit of Lebanon. Where are you? Can you be clearer on that? Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. And I'll add one more question actually from Tom Beckett.
Mine's also a Syria-related question, but it's maybe slightly broader in that back in 2015, despite Iranian support, Assad was losing, and the Russians intervened, and now the facts on the ground are different. In 2019, despite ignoring UN resolutions, the Trump administration recognized Israeli annexation of the Golan Heights because, as then Secretary of State Pompeo said, we're simply recognizing the facts on the ground. And then harking back last night to the Indonesian defense minister citing Thucydides, is the diplomatic outreach going on because the region is strong, or because being weak, they suffer what they must?
Thank you very much for that. Maybe I'll go in reverse order, as it were, and perhaps ask Abdullatif, particularly on the question on Lebanon, then the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq, and then Ayman.
I think there are two questions, one about Yemen and the compromising solution, and the other one is about Lebanon. Lebanon has been or was really a beacon for stability, for prosperity. Every Arab citizen was really looking at Lebanon with admiration. I think the issue now rather is really, it's more of internal diplomacy. The problem is in Lebanon. The diplomacy is, the issues need to be resolved within Lebanon, and we can extend support in trying to find solutions in the future. But once it is demonstrated that Hezbollah can be changing its behavior and changing its, and that's what I was talking about, the behavior where it is affecting really not only Lebanon, but also its neighbors and its friends and brotherly states to Lebanon. You're shaking your head. It is a challenge for the Lebanese to really look into changing their policy with Hezbollah and try to find ways where their decisions can be implemented on the ground. We've seen what has happened, and we've seen threatening the the Saudis with and our countries with supporting extremists, with detonators, with inciting people for unrest. We've seen it, and it's demonstrated. Also, charging and I mean allowing the narcotics and drugs to be smuggled. All of that, it's really needs to be altered, changed, and the policy needs to be changed. In that way, Lebanon will be able to, we care about the ordinary people. And even the community, the Lebanese community within our countries are really well looked after, and they are not really affected by what we are in process, and hoping that Lebanon with Hezbollah can really change. Compromising the solution with Yemen, that's all what we've been looking for. As a GCC and as countries, we were trying to really help the Yemenis right from day one of saving Yemen from civil war, saving Yemen from bloodshed. And that was the initial objective of the GCC initiative. Which is really trying to achieve even compromising within the Yemeni people. We got to the point where it was really on a very peaceful path with the support of the GCC countries. Unfortunately, the process was undermined by the Houthis and by with the support of the Iranians, where the whole process was jeopardized. So the intention of the GCC and the Saudi was demonstrated in the initiative of the Saudis calling for a ceasefire and resolving to a peaceful political solution, calling the Houthis to come for negotiation. That's the intention all along. It's really a peaceful, reaching a peaceful solution where Yemen will not threaten its neighbors. We will not, it's just not acceptable to have militias threatening the Saudis and Saudi's territories and the Saudis people. More than 600, I think even 700 missiles were fired, and more than 450 UAVs were fired continuously on Saudi Arabia. That will not be accepted, but the compromise is by going to the political solution and the negotiation. And that's what we are calling for.
Dr. Fuad Hussein.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, you mentioned neighboring diplomacy. In fact, that is the path which we are following in Iraq. And I think if we are talking about conflicts and tensions, and then about solutions and managing the crisis, then it will be right and correct to mention that we have got internal conflicts in various countries in the Middle East. But at the same time, we have got also interstate conflicts and tension. And often, these two are interlinked. So when we are talking about situation in Lebanon, it is not only an internal problem, it is also a regional problem. It is not only an internal conflict, it is also a regional conflict. When we are talking about Syria, it is a national, regional, international conflict. In fact, the tension among the political parties in Iraq itself, part of it has to do with the regional conflict. That's valid for Yemen and other areas. So that's why we were trying to deal with the tensions in our society in the political fields of Iraq. And after studying the tensions and conflicts among the political parties, we reached the conclusion to manage these crises internally, we are obliged to manage it externally. So we must cross the border to manage also our internal problem. And that's one of the reasons why we follow this, you call it a neighboring diplomacy, and we are trying to create, instead of having the logic of war in our political arena, to create the logic of dialogue in this area. And that's what we need. That's the tool which will create a different kind of security, and we need a collective security. So we cannot talk about security of one of the countries in the region without talking about a collective security. So we need each other. We need to come together. We need to have dialogue. So that's why we initiated and we invited our neighboring countries plus to Baghdad, and we had this summit meeting in Baghdad, and we are hoping to continue this method in the future. So dealing with the internal conflicts in Lebanon, in Syria, in many other countries in the Middle East, we need to come together on different levels and to manage it on different levels so that we can solve our internal problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It is the case in this region that the domestic politics of one country become the domestic politics of its neighbor rather quickly. Domestic politics are commutable here. Ayman, over to you.
Thank you, John. Start with refugees. And let me just say that Jordan is the second largest per capita host of refugees anywhere in the world. Almost 35% of our population are refugees. Syria alone, we have 1.3 million Syrians. 662,000 of them are registered with UNHCR. The rest are not. Just to give you some background, only 10% of refugees live in refugee camp. The rest are all over the country. We've given about 200,000 work permits to Syrians. That's more than 4 or 5 times the jobs our economy can create on an annual basis, and that's in a good year, and that's before COVID. 133,000 Syrian kids go to our schooling system, and I can go on and on. And our strategy from the very beginning that it is we need to be able to do everything we possibly can to provide refugees with the dignified life they deserve because they're there. 15%, my friends, of refugees, Syrian refugees in Jordan are under the age of 15. That means the only country they really ever got to know is Jordan. Again, we're doing everything we can to provide them with education, with hope, with opportunity, but we do see an alarming trend of donor fatigue. We do see an alarming regression in terms of not only support, but attention. The issue of refugees is getting. I'm revealing no secret, for instance, by saying that the World Food Programme was about to cut subsidies for about 300,000 Syrians in Jordan, had it not for a German intervention with 20 million euros that allowed them to go on for a couple of so more months. Refugees cannot be the responsibility of host countries alone. This is a global challenge, and the whole international community needs to shoulder its responsibility in that regard. We do appreciate and we do value the support that we've gotten from our friends and partners over the years, but we have to ring the alarm and say, listen, this is happening. And if you ask any UN or other international organization dealing with refugees, they would tell you that there's a very alarming trend in sort of abandoning that cause. And this is, by the way, a strategic mistake because, again, as I said in my intervention, abandon refugees to despair and ignorance and need, and they will be an easy recruit for every radical thinking out there, but provide them with hope, with education, with dignity, with acceptance, and they'll be either productive members in communities where they exist, or they'll be the army that would rebuild their countries. And from a European perspective, I would say that if a Syrian refugee is comfortable in the region, they will not think of crossing the sea into Europe. And the cost of sustaining a refugee in the region is almost 1/10 of that in Europe. So that's a global challenge which we all need to work on. And as Jordan, we're going to continue to do everything we possibly can to help, like in the case of COVID, where our policy from day one was everybody who's in Jordan is going to get the same treatment, because we do believe that COVID is not going to differentiate between a Jordanian citizen and a Syrian or other refugees. So the first refugee in the world to be vaccinated was in Jordan, and that's a constant policy. But then again, as I said, we have been at the receiving end of every crisis in the region, and it is our prerogative to try and do whatever we can to serve our people and protect the interests of our country. And that brings me to the issue of the broader engagement with Syria. I mean, when we deal with the Syrian crisis, there are two dimensions. One is the bilateral and the other is the broader. From the bilateral perspective, we have 367 kilometers of border with Syria. Over the past few years, the biggest threat was terrorism. Lately, there's another major threat, which is drug trafficking. Again, in full transparency, in the past, when the commodity was traditional drugs, Jordan was more of a transit market because, you know, the purchase power is not that big. But now with the advent of chemical drugs like Captagon, we have become a target. And our Joint Chief of Staff would tell you that, who's here with us in the room, would tell you that hardly a day passes by without us facing and countering an attempt to smuggle Captagon and other drugs into Jordan. We've got trade into Europe that has been disrupted. So one side of it is how do we mitigate against the terrible consequences of this crisis in Jordan. Again, of the 1.3 million Syrians, nobody is going back. So that is one side of it. The other side is the crisis in general. I mean, let's be honest, there has been no crisis to solve there's been no effort, no strategy to solve the Syrian crisis over the past few years. It has been living with the status quo politics. And living with the status quo could, with all due respect for those far away who do not have to deal with the consequences, short-term or even mid-term or long-term of the crisis. But for us, no, we cannot afford with status quo as politics. So what we're trying to do in Jordan is to work with all our friends, all our partners, to try and see, can we get movement towards a solution which we all agree on, that is a political solution. So basically what we're trying to do in Jordan is to work with all friends, all our partners, and yes, we're in coordination with all our neighboring countries, with Europe, with the US, who's a major ally as well, to try and see what is it that we can do together to create horizon towards finding the political solution to the crisis, to which we all agree there is no alternative. So that's what we're trying to do. And we never, by the way, severed diplomatic links with Syria. All through the crisis, we did maintain embassies, and those embassies continue to operate. On the issue of Lebanon and the gas and electricity deal, no, with all due respect, no, we did this for Lebanon. There's very little for us in Jordan if you want to sort of quantify the economic return. We did that because we do believe we have to help Lebanon. We need to get to make sure that kids and at schools and hospitals and households have electricity, and that's what we engaged in this deal. And we are proactive in Lebanon. We're trying to help stop the deterioration to the extent that we can. When His Majesty was in Washington earlier this year, a major talking point, a major issue that he raised was Lebanon, because we do not want yet another failed state in the region. And our policy in Jordan has always been, we need to save Lebanon, save the Lebanese people, and prevent them from collapsing further, because that is in the interest of everybody in the region. And therefore, helping Lebanon, helping the Lebanese people, regardless of whatever views we have on certain political components in Lebanon, has been a constant in Jordanian policy. We did try to help to the extent that we can. By the end of the day, we're a small country with not a lot of resources, but we did try to help with medical supplies. We dispatched at some point a field hospital to Lebanon. So whatever we can do, we do. So we are active, but ultimately, and again, it is the Lebanese who will solve their problem. It is not. We are proactive to the extent that we can, but ultimately what is needed is for our Lebanese brother to be able and solve their issues and move forward with steps and measures that would save their country and get them on track. Again, in Jordan, the number of external shocks with which we've had to deal over the years, I just remind you all that 10 years ago, our GDP was growing at over 8%. Even before COVID, it went down to under 2%. Why? Because we saw what happened with Iraq, Syria, and of course, even the impact of the unfortunate disruptive events in Egypt, when the disruption of Egyptian gas to Jordan cost us about $11 billion. And that's a tremendous amount of money for a country the size of our economy. And again, we look at the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and we keep saying, we cannot jump over this issue. There's got to be progress towards peace. And to the answer to my colleague from Italy, if I got his answer correctly, we are trying to find horizons. We are trying to address those political crises with a view to making sure we create an environment that is conducive for the creation of jobs, creation of opportunity, pooling more resources to address the humanitarian issues. And our position vis-a-vis the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is that it has to be solved in the basis of the two-state solution, because if that solution is undermined, then the only alternative is the one-state reality. And I don't say the one-state solution because it will not be a solution. It is a one-state reality, and it's going to be an ugly reality because it is going to be apartheid. So what we do in Jordan, we continue to engage, including with the Israeli government, in coordination with the Palestinians, to make sure that we create political horizons, because again, the status quo cannot continue. We've got to move forward with a political solution. We've got to bring the parties back to the table and move towards the two-state solution and create that momentum that will be the only way to save us from having to face another eruption of conflict soon. Thank you.
Super, thank you very much. Very specific answers to very specific questions. We've got time for about 3 or 4 interventions. If each of the panelists would then be disciplined to give 90-second answers to the questions. But I think it's important to hear from the floor some other perspectives, because that's part of the dialogue as well. So could I first ask from Kuwait, Badr al-Saif. Badr.
Thank you, John. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq. You referred to a keen interest in developing ties with immediate neighbors Kuwait and Turkey. My question is twofold. How do you see that unfolding with both states? And how does it factor in with Iraq's arguably stronger ties with other immediate neighbors like Iran, Jordan, and Syria? And second, what is the latest update on delimiting the remainder of the Kuwait-Iraq maritime boundary? Thank you.
A very specific question again. Franz Stefan Gadi.
Thank you, John. This is a question for the Foreign Minister of Bahrain. You mentioned this idea of comprehensive deterrence, and I was wondering, since you mentioned cyberspace, to what degree you could elaborate on deterrence in cyberspace. Do you have any concrete examples? Thank you.
And again from Israel, Barak Ravid.
Thank you very much. 2 short Abraham Accords questions. First to Minister Hussein. Do you see any opportunity for Iraq joining the Abraham Accords anytime soon? And for Minister Safadi, Jordan, the UAE, and Israel are going to sign on Monday an agreement for electricity for water agreement. Was this something that, were the Abraham Accords something that allowed Jordan to do those kind of things that it couldn't do before?
Yasmin Farouk from France.
Thank you very much. I have 2 questions. The first one is for His Excellency, the Deputy Prime Minister from Iraq. I'll just start by saying in Arabic, أنا سعيدة أشوف العراق.
I'm very happy to see Iraq play a role in the Arab region.
The cooperation with Jordan and Egypt. And I would like to ask you whether you see this as an alternative framework for regional cooperation and for dealing with regional conflict to the framework that has been dominating since the Arab Spring until now, or do you see it as complementary? The second question is to His Excellency, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Bahrain, and thank you for hosting us. It is also about the Abraham Accords. I have a very specific question about Bahrain's position from a potential Israeli presence in the Gulf, specifically contributing to the military security of the Gulf region, and a question about the dimension of the people-to-people relationship with Israel, because the Abraham Accords were presented as being different because they are going to be warmer than the peace between Egypt and Jordan, for instance, and Israel on the other side. Thank you.
And I'll take one more from Mark Fitzpatrick.
Thank you, John. My question is for Foreign Minister al-Zayani. We heard Deputy Prime Minister Safadi eloquently call for a true mechanism of regional cooperation, for active diplomacy as the only viable path to long-term solutions. But he also called for relations with Iran based on non-interference. I suppose that Foreign Minister Zayani would agree with all three of those statements, but maybe with emphasis on the non-interference part of it. My question is, for regional cooperation mechanisms, we sometimes we envision the Manama Dialogue as being an important forum for dialogue with all parts of the region. Iran has in the past been part of the Manama Dialogue. The question is, what do you envision would be required for Iran to again be part of the Manama Dialogue and part of this important forum for discussion?
Thank you very much. So very challenging for our panelists to answer all those questions crisply within the time limit I offered them, but we'll give it a go in reverse order. Ayman Safadi first, then Fuad Hussein, then we'll end with our host, Abdullatif Zayani.
Thank you, John. We signed a peace treaty with Israel 27 years ago, and we signed that treaty at the time within the context of search for a comprehensive peace that would also address the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. At that time, remember, if you all go back to 1994, all the talk was about peace dividend. Unfortunately, we did not see much of that, nor did we see progress on the core issue, which is solving the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. The fact that there has not been many projects in the past, I have to say, was due to some policies of the previous Israeli government, which did not contribute in any way to an environment of cooperation. I remind you all of the Red Dead, a project which we spent years negotiation with a lot of generous contributions from our partners in Europe and the States to try and get that project moving, and it was the previous Israeli government that decided to walk away from it at the last moment. So we saw a trend with the previous government of trying to really spoil everything that could get us on a more cooperative path in this part of the world, not just in terms of Jordan-Israeli relations, but also in terms of moving ahead with the peace process. So that is where we are. Again, Jordan, as I said, when we speak with the credibility of a peacemaker, and our objective always is to work towards a regional environment of peace and cooperation where the rights of all are respected, and we move together towards addressing the many challenges that we have. But again, I think it is essential that we look at the whole ecosystem as we do that, and understand that we cannot jump over issues. We've got to address everything head on, and in that we have to say we've got to address the core issue of the conflict, which is the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, move with the peace process, create horizons, create economic hope, create political hope, and then also address areas in which we can all work together for the building of a better future for all our peoples and region.
Thank you very much. And moving to the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq, I might just ask him also to address the unfortunate assassination attempt on your own Prime Minister, and what that means for the nature of democracy in Iraq and the relations with your immediate neighbors.
Thank you very much. As for, I've got 1 minute, right? Yeah. So, and 3 questions, okay. As for the question related to Iraq-Kuwait ties, I think the relationship between both countries has been developed, and we cleared the path for the coming government not to deal with a lot of issues. In fact, we have got some minor issues which will be solved, and which has to do with the past, with the invasion of Iraq and Kuwait. But I think gradually we are solving also these problems, which has to do with the borders and otherwise the ties and relationship with between Iraq and Kuwait is excellent. As for the expectation, the question was, is Iraq is going to be part of the Abraham Accord soon? So in short, I can say no. This is a very difficult issue and has to do with many reasons. Of course, I'm not here to explain the reasons, but the answer of this question is no. For the cooperation and working together with Egypt and Jordan, Jordan is an important partner of Iraq. It has been always an important partner of Iraq on various fields, internationally and regionally. And this cooperation between Iraq and Jordan and Egypt has to do also with the balancing diplomacy that we are following. We want to have good relationship with all our neighboring countries, but good relationship with all our neighboring countries, it needs also keeping the equation of having a balanced relationship. For Iraq, that's important. So with eastern side of the country, as well as with western side of the country, as we have got also good ties with northern neighbor, as with southern neighbor. So we were trying to balance all our relationship with neighboring countries. That's what we need. I think that's the region needs, to have these ties so that if there will be problem, and we have got many problems, we have got many security problems as well as other problems, we need each other, we need to come together. So these ties with Jordan and with Egypt is important for Iraq. Jordan, as I said, is our partner, our neighboring country. But Egypt is an important Arab country, a leading country in Arab world and in Africa. So for Iraq, it's important to have and to keep this relationship with these three countries. Thank you very much.
Abdullatif.
Thank you, John. Regarding the cyber deterrence, actually, what I was explaining is we need not only to look at deterrence as a hard deterrence, forces on the ground to deter, but look at it comprehensively, including economic deterrence and electronic and cyber deterrence. It is a component of achieving the objective of influencing the behavior of any opponent to do the thing that whoever is implementing the deterrence to achieve his or its objective. So even by having a passive cyber capability can also cause a deterrence. And that I will leave it with the scholars and scientists to see how they can achieve that objective and how can they measure the effect of cyberspace on achieving the degree of deterrence that they want or needs to be achieved. The Abraham Accord, I'd like to make it clear, we are not forming a bloc against any country. The Abraham Accord is a path of peace, not only between the two countries. We hope with time that peace will spill over to the whole region. This is the objective. What my brother, His Excellency Ayman Safadi, indicated. We have millions of young Middle Easterns who are deprived of education, health, clean water, shelter, their parents have been separated or lost their parents. For 12 years, they didn't go to school. So we can see the effect of those millions of people that we have in the region. Should we continue on the same path that whatever we were coordinating on led us to this level, or should we explore venues where we can give those millions of people hope at the end of the tunnel, hope that they can live in peace, and when we can have an interconnected, interdependent, stable region, and for all the peoples and nations of the region, despite their differences in ideology and ethnicity and religion and sect, we can live all together in one region. And we call this for all, including the Iranians, including the Israelis, and all who are in the region. How can we find that path? I think, as my brother Ayman said, that is the challenge. We hope with this approach we can be a conduit. We believe that to reach that ultimate objective, the bedrock of that process is really resolving the Palestinian-Israeli issue based on the two-state solution. We say that everywhere, and we advocate it, and we believe in it. We believe that this is the only way to reach a prosperous and safe and secure region. But let's think out of the box and let's cooperate. I fully agree with the cooperation and integration. We just need to see ways of, or other ways than hatred, confrontation, wars, violence, and extremism, and self-invested, really, interest of some. Let's look at the national interest and let's look at the regional interest. I know some will say we are optimistic and positive, but I think after COVID and post-COVID era, we have to inject hope in the region, and that's why I was calling for, let's measure the sentiments. Let's have positive outlook. Let's all work together. If there is one lesson that COVID taught us, if I can use the term, was the need for cooperation, and that we need to coexist together, and we need to be interdependent to have a safe, secure lives for our children and grandchildren.
Abdullatif, thank you very much. You've brought this session to the end on an optimistic and positive note. You've got a lunch that you're urgently about to host. Let me, on your behalf and the behalf of the IISS, thank all the delegates for a marvelous debate this morning, and our co-panelists for contributing so specially to that. Thank you very much. You're free to go to lunch, but do come back by 2:30 so that we're able to start promptly at 2:45. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much.